Alright guys, what's up? Just decided to jump on here. Just got off work and was sitting here rigging up some Huddlestons, getting ready for the spring. You know, it's almost springtime here. Not really, we still got another month and a half before I start fishing for pre-spawn fish. But getting excited, getting, gear set up. And today I got off work and I started messing around with some Huddlestons and seeing what I have, because a lot of times I fish the Huddlestons in that like early to mid-spring, and then I kind of just throw them all in a tub, and I have no idea, which ones are rigged which way, the rate of fall. So then I got to kind of go through them and figure out which ones I want to start off throwing in the spring. So I have a bunch of 8-inch Huds here. That's mainly what I fish. A lot of 8-inch stuff. And a lot of trout. So where I'm at, we're fishing for northern strains. So a lot of northern strain fish, smaller mouths on them, smaller fish in general, right? I'm not looking for a teener fish. I'm looking for, that the biggest, a double digit. And anything over like 6 pounds, in that 6 pound range, is a really solid fish for me. So throwing this 8-inch Hud, I really target those fish. When I step down to a 6-inch bait, and that's just a soft bait in general, whether it be a citizen or a unique bait, whatever it is, some kind of soft bait, anything in that 6-inch range is going to get any fish between 1 and like 5 pounds. And then once I step it up to the 8-inch, I really start to see more of those 5 and up following and trying to eat the bait. However, I still get a lot of like 3 and to 5 pound fish coming up and hitting these, but with the jig hook on them, it's a lot harder to hook them. So how I like to rig my Huds is kind of the Butch Brown style, with the treble hook on top. How I do it is a little bit different. I use just a piece of braid. I don't run a wire. I just run a piece of braid on here. I use like 80 or 100 pound braided line. If I get the green color, it matches to my Huds pretty good, depending on what color you're using. But like the trout colors are a darker color, that braided line blends right in with the back, so you have no issue there with the fish seeing that. So I like to use the braid. One of the reasons is because I can take this very easily and make it a belly hook. A lot of people are kind of ticked off that the Huds don't have the bottom hook hanger anymore, but a lot of times if I want a bottom hook, all I do is rig that treble on there with a piece of braid, and all you do is take this. If you want, you can cut a little notch in the nose so that line sits in there. But I just take that braid and loop it from the bottom, and now you have a bottom hooked Hud. It works very, very well. So I can swap that back and forth very easily when I use a braid instead of like a wire up here. So that's why I like to do that. But I like the treble hook rig just because our fish, because they're northern strains, they have a harder time engulfing the whole Hud. When you got a jig hook on here, obviously sometimes they'll come up and eat the head. But if they're trying to come up and grab the bait, they have a hard time engulfing it. And that jig hook, when they come up and slap at it or hit the head, I was having a lot harder time hooking up. Whereas the treble hook, now you have 2 points exposed. And so when they come up and slap at the bait, they have a lot better chance at actually getting the treble hooks on there. And I like to run pretty small treble hooks as well. These are size 2. These are like Gamakatsu size 2, which is very small for a lot of people. But I really like to hide my hooks on there. I don't want a big old, 2 or 3/0 treble hook on there. So I'll run a pretty small treble hook on the top. Pretty much the same treble hook I'm throwing with a lot of my hard baits. Size 2 Gamakatsu. Blends in pretty good. You can either cut off that hook, or this one is not cut off, but like this one, I cut off that 3rd treble on there and just bend it and stick it in the plastic. Some of them I don't actually cut it off, I just bend it a little bit. So that way, if it comes out, the fish actually still has a chance of getting hooked on that. Because a lot of times with a treble hook, what will happen is the fish will initially hit one of them and get stuck. And we, all see it with treble hooks, especially hard baits. They get 1 point, and then you're fighting them, another point will hook them. So cutting off a point actually decreases your odds a little bit, because now you're missing that point. So sometimes I just leave that point on there and just kind of bend it a little bit. And I know people are like, oh my gosh, bending hooks. Now I'm going to bend one out on a big fish. I haven't had it happen yet. Like I said, I'm fishing for northern strains. So a lot of these fish I'm catching are in like the 6-pound range, not the 10-pound range. You know, if I hook one of those, obviously I think I'll still be able to land it. But a lot of my fish are between that like 3 to like 6 pounds. So I'm not really worried about it too much. With the lighter treble hook and bending the hooks a little bit. I also like to bend them in a little bit. I like to take a pair of pliers and just grab these top ones and just squeeze it a little bit, because you don't want to put a treble hook on top of this bait and have those treble hooks stick out off the sides, because then every time you bump anything with the HUD, especially if you're bottom contacting this bait, anytime you bump anything with it, it's going to roll and those hooks are going to catch. So I like to squeeze them in a little bit. It just helps to make it more snagless, weedless. So that's kind of how I do rig my HUDs. I like to fish a couple different rate of falls. Well, mainly, I guess 2. I'll fish either a rate of fall 0 with a nail weight or 2 in it, and I just throw enough nail weights in them just to keep it so it's riding true, and I can creep it on top. And I have a Tyrant now, a Tyrant 8 that I got last season, and I threw around a little bit, but I was throwing the HUDs a lot still. This year, when I'm doing this, I'll probably experiment with the Tyrant 8, but I was basically fishing an 8-inch HUD like the Tyrant. I was taking the treble hook here and pulling it around bottom, and I take a rate of fall 0, put a nail weight in it, and I could throw it out there and just kind of creep it along the top, and those fish would come up and annihilate it. And that's why I ended up going to treble hooks as well, because with a jig hook on it, and I'm fishing it on top, a lot of our fish are not coming up and engulfing the bait. They're slapping at the bottom of it. So the treble hooks will stick them. Almost like a hard bait when they come up and slap at it and get a treble hook. That's almost what's happening when I fish the HUD like that. Then the other way I fish it is obviously bottom bouncing, you know, creeping it along bottom. So then I'll use either a rate of fall 5 or a rate of fall 12, depending on how deep of water I am. And a lot of times if I'm gonna, you know, have one dedicated to bottom crawling, I'll keep that jig hook on there just because it is more weedless if I'm dragging it on the bottom and I'm looking for a big fish that's gonna engulf the bait. But when I'm fishing it near the surface, I like that treble hook that I can swap back and forth. So the rod that I throw my 8-inch HUDs on is the Champion 807. You know, I don't really see a lot of guys using Dobbins a whole lot, like, anymore. I feel like with the swim baits, there's like people, you know, when you first get into the swim bait world and you start buying your cheaper baits, your knockoffs, and then you start throwing like the production rods like Dobbins and the iRod Genesis, right, the swim bait series. But then as people get like really into it, they get to the custom swim bait rods. So, you know, a lot of the guys, the bigger guys in swim baiting are throwing custom rods. So I don't really see a whole lot of people throwing the Dobbins Champions anymore. But I love throwing the 807, Dobbins Champion 807 mag swim bait rod. It's an 8-foot, 3 to 10 ounces. Now, we all know Dobbins overrates their rods if you've ever used them. That's a 3 to 10 ounce rod. But it throws like an 8-inch HUD really good, which I think an 8-inch HUD's like 3 to 4 ounces probably. Like a Citizen 7, it throws really good on there, which is again probably like 3 ounces. So that, you know, 3 to like 6 ounces is where I'd throw on that rod. I tried to throw a 10-inch HUD on it, and the 10-inch HUD I think weighs, I don't quote me on this, but probably like 8 ounces. And it actually was pretty tough throwing that on there. So, but the 8-inch HUDs, that rod throws it really, really good. It's a pretty stiff rod, which again, you kind of have to worry about treble hooks. So what I like to do, because I was having issues, is I will throw copoly or mono on here. Right now I have a P-Line CXX, which is a copolymer line. I don't know if I like this color though. I just bought a new spool of it and it's this green color. Which I don't know how that's going to look in the water. I haven't thrown it yet because it's winter time here, so I'm not really bass fishing right now, but I just ordered some of that stuff, And normally I run the clear, but all they had in stock where I ordered it from was the green. And it used to be like a moss green color, and now it's almost like, I don't know, it's like a mix between a moss green and almost like a brighter green. So we'll see how it looks in the water. But I want to be stealthy. But the problem with fluorocarbon is I was throwing a lot of fluorocarbon with my soft baits to be stealthy, and I was breaking a lot of fish off. On hook sets, I was breaking fish off, or if I fished a treble hook rig, you have a better chance of, I never did, but you have a better chance with fluorocarbon of bending a treble hook out with that stiff rod, because there's just no give. And on the hook sets, I was swinging so hard, and at the stiff rod, I was just popping that fluorocarbon. So this year I'm experimenting. I started out swim bait fishing with copolymers. I used the CX Premium, some of the P-Line stuff, and I really liked it. But then, as you get in and see, Mike Gilbert and all the swim bait stuff, everyone's like, oh, fluorocarbon, throw them on fluorocarbon, because you want to be invisible, right? But then I really hate throwing fluorocarbon as mainline. So I'm going to experiment with throwing copolymers and also maybe a braid to a leader and throw a braid to a shock leader system. I might try that. I just don't like having a lot of knots. Having a braid to a leader, you created a fail point because now there's a knot between that braid and that leader. Obviously, if you get good at tying knots and you're not worried about it, people don't have issues. But just another fail point in that line scares me a little bit. So right now I have a straight copolymer. That's what I'm going to be starting out with the spring. And if I feel like I'm getting less bites, then I'm going to switch over to I might even go back to straight fluoro. Or I might throw that braid to a shock fluorocarbon leader. So that way it's a little more stealthy. But at the beginning when I started throwing swim baits, I was throwing copolymer. I was getting follows, getting bites. So I really don't think it matters a ton depending on how pressured your fish are. I think a lot of times if you have a big bait, they're focused on that bait. Obviously, if you're throwing 25-pound straight old school mono that's going to stick out like a sore thumb, they're going to be able to see it. But nowadays we have a copolymers, which some of them are pretty thin and pretty invisible. So I think I can get away with it. So that's what I'm going to play with this spring. But I'm getting excited, you guys. Where I'm at, Pacific Northwest, up in Washington. I don't like to say it because I don't want a lot of guys knowing oh, that's where I'm at and start fishing. If you're up here, I don't want you to be fishing these little ponds and lakes that I'm fishing because I don't have access to a boat right now. I'm hoping that one day I'll get a kayak. Obviously, I want a boat one day, but maybe in the next couple years I'll be able to get a little kayak and really start kayak fishing and open up my range. But right now, for the most part, I'm stuck to bank fishing. And a lot of our bigger lakes, they just don't have a lot of bank access and they're not that great from the bank. So I'm fishing a lot of smaller man-made lakes and ponds. Not your, stocked ponds. Everyone sees you fish in a pond and they're like, oh, he's fishing some, little stocked pond that has nobody else fishing. But I'm talking about urban ponds, right down here a couple blocks from my house there's actually a lake and it's got bass in it and it's very, very tough. It gets pounded on. Always people there, always people fishing, trout fishing, bass fishing, you name it. Those fish are so pressured that the only thing I can really get bit on there is swim baits. I used to throw conventional there a lot and I would catch a couple dinks every once in a while. But I started throwing swim baits there and it's still very, very tough. But I'm averaging, right now, keep the streak alive, I'm averaging about one good fish out of there a year throwing swim baits. One 5-pound class fish out of there a year. And I'm not fishing it a ton, but I'm stopping there after work and stuff. And so it's a tough lake, right? And the other, lakes I'm fishing from the bank, they're lakes that get beat. They're not little, farm ponds that no one touches. They are tough lakes. They get trout stocks in them. A ton of people fish them for trout and bass. So they're pretty beat up. But right now I'm steelhead fishing, Right now we're in January, mid-January. We're steelhead fishing. But as soon as it starts warming up here, probably, about, depending, sometimes we get snow here in April. But, most of the time by about middle of March is when it's go time. and I'll be able to catch some big fish starting to move around for pre-spawn. So that's my kind of HUD situation, and how I fish HUDs, what I fish them on, kind of went over that. For the reel on here, actually, didn't talk about that. You guys probably saw Shimano Tranks. The Shimano Tranks 300, I just saw they came out with a brand new one, which looks pretty sick. But I love this 300. It is a beast. I've had it for probably 3 or 4 years now, throwing swim baits on it consistently, and it still feels smooth as butter. It's definitely a tank of a reel. The only complaint I have is how heavy it is. You know, you get these nice rods, and I don't know, you know, I don't have a custom swim bait rod, but you see guys, they get a custom swim bait rod, it's super lightweight in their hand, and you feel like a big heavy reel on it, and it just kills the vibe for me. So this Tranks, it is pretty heavy. Sometimes I'm like, man, you know, should I get a different reel on there because that Tranks is so heavy? But it's a beast. It can throw anything, and it's going to last a long time. You know, I also sometimes will throw the Shimano Cardiff, which is, you know, beginner swim bait reel. But the Shimano Cardiffs are very lightweight, and they're pretty durable. So sometimes I swap and throw this Cardiff on there just because that Tranks is so heavy. And if you're throwing that all day long, it's a pretty heavy setup. So I'll switch out to the Cardiff every once in a while. You know, so anyway, that's my setup right now. That's what I'm rocking with the HUDs. So yeah. Get out there, and I don't know where you guys are at in the world where you're watching this, but hopefully you can bass fish. So get out there, throw some baits, and slay some fish.